الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا مولانا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا Muhammad. Nafisa Seminary presents Contemporary Issues in Female Scholarship, Navigating Knowledge between the Fiqh of Tasawwuf and the Tasawwuf of Fiqh. This is Lesson 2. In the Islamic scholarly tradition, compound terms are not defined hastily. Rather, the method of the classical scholars was to begin by breaking them down into their constituent parts, defining each term independently before bringing them back together into a unified meaning. Such as the term usul al-fiqh. The classical pattern would be to define usul and fiqh separately, and then rejoin them to define the compound term. Accordingly, in attempting to define female scholarship, we must first define its two components, female and scholarship. What is a scholar? What is a female? Setting aside for now which of these may prove more difficult to define, we begin with the term of broader scope, scholarship. For the core issues embedded within it are not confined to gender, but affect the very structure of knowledge and tradition as a whole. The more specific category of the female scholar inherits these perennial questions, while also carrying its own distinct set of modern and historical challenges. In the previous lesson, we identified the conceptual translation of the term Islamic scholar as prophetic inheritance. In this lesson, we will take this discussion further to the classical definition of prophetic inheritance itself, which may be summarized as a sound intellect within a sound heart. Now, the process of cultivating the sound heart is being addressed in our two parallel series, The Awakening of Aspiration, the first female-authored marginalia on Iqadh al-Himam fi Sharh al-Hikam, and Salawat Nur al-Anwar of Sayyidi Ahmad al-Badawi, Qaddasallahu Sirrahu, the first female-authored commentary on his salawat wording. Each of these represent a metafiqh contribution to tradition, specifically the fiqh of tasawwuf, a term which we will define with precision in due course. In this series, however, our primary concern is the second half of that definition, the prophetic intellect, and its integrated role in the formation of scholarship. Through this dual demonstration of female scholarly expertise in both the fiqh of tasawwuf and the tasawwuf of fiqh, we aim to present a comprehensive, authentic, and authoritative model of how the Islamic intellectual tradition is to be both preserved and meaningfully extended in the modern era. We are the new generation of female scholarship. We are the new breath of tradition. We are the lotus that lives on. Now, defining the prophetic intellect naturally leads us to a critical distinction within tradition, the difference between the acquisition of knowledge and the formation of intellect. Yet, before we proceed, the widespread fragmentation of the modern age requires that we take a step back and define a more foundational principle, integration itself. It is for this purpose that we have initiated a neologism, the term metafiqh, a concept rooted in the thought of Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala. In Imam al-Ghazali's most consequential contribution to Islamic scholarship, it was essentially metafiqh. He examined the outward sciences through an inward lens. This is the tasawwuf of fiqh. Then he examined the inward sciences through an outward lens. This is the fiqh of tasawwuf. This dual method forms the basis of the hikam genre, as discussed in prior lessons. In doing so, he established a double-sided mirror, one that purified the sacred sciences of distortions that crept into them over time. This is precisely how the Hamlet verdict functioned, grounded in Ghazalian premises, yet articulated for a modern context vastly different than his own. But an essential question remains: what were those underlying premises? What is the connection between the rectification of the sacred sciences and the revival of the Ummah? Does the unseen world exert consequences upon the visible? What is the relationship between a breach of divine trust, precisely what Imam al-Ghazali sought to repair, and the decline of the Ummah? Here we arrive at the unspoken foundation of his vision. Imam al-Ghazali perceived a living connection between the celestial and earthly realms. The bridge between them is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For those who find it difficult to conceptualize this, consider a modern analogy. In modern imaginative depictions of the figure of the avatar, he is depicted as the bridge between the spiritual and material worlds, tasked with restoring balance between them, which manifests as harmony in the human realm. The Muhammadan reality, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that bridge. Across time, space, and generations, prophetic inheritance is the chain through which this illuminating reality is transmitted from scholar to scholar, casting light into the tangible world. Having accessed this light, Imam al-Ghazali was able to interpret the condition of his world through this illumination. Through it, he grasped both the principle of revival and its operative method, metafiqh. He recognized that the divine trust binds the two realms and that its integrity is maintained through the two dimensions of the sacred sciences, the outward and the inward. This is why a significant portion of his reformative effort was directed toward the so-called religious class. This trajectory was not a social media scam, however, as it is sometimes wielded by modern pseudo-Sufis, but as a recognition of the heavy, unseen weight of responsibility attached to religious authority. For anyone who understands Imam al-Ghazali through the tradition, not by circumventing it, it is evident that the Ihya rests upon deeply rooted spiritual premises. First, that the Muhammadan reality, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the bond between the celestial and earthly realms. Second, that this bond is governed by the divine trust. Third, that a breach of this trust produces devastating consequences in the visible world, a reality that he witnessed during a time of profound political fragmentation and moral decline in the Ummah. Fourth, that the guardians of this trust are the prophetic inheritors. Thus, the responsibility of preservation and rectification rests upon them, and the fate of the Ummah is tied to their fulfillment of this role. Fifth, that the distortions affecting the sacred sciences emerged from a complex interplay of maladies, both in the outward sciences, reflecting the prophetic intellect, and the inward sciences, reflecting the prophetic heart. Sixth, that the root of these maladies lies in the loss of integration. The outward within the inward becomes blind, while the inward without the outward becomes paralyzed. Both fragment the Muhammadan reality, sallallahu alaihi wa ala alihi wasallam. From this emerged his final unifying premise, that the Muhammadan light, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is not merely experiential, but ontological. It is woven into the very fabric of existence. Thus, when conflict arises, the spiritual reality ultimately prevails over the material. Wallahu ghalibun ala amrih. From this conviction, the Ihya was born, a project to restore the unity of the sacred sciences by reuniting their mirrored dimensions, the tasawwuf within fiqh and the fiqh within tasawwuf. This is metafiqh. The Hamlet verdict was issued in two parts, beginning on August 2023. The first was entitled Deterring Dishonor, a metafiqh approach to reinstating legal and social constraints on the harm of women. And the second was entitled The Real Metafiqh, You will find both of them linked in comments under this lesson. The two documents were released with a deliberate interval of 1 week, during which the response was observed. For indeed, men and women are known by their stances. What was the response? A spectrum of fragmentation, utter chaos, complete blindness, flagrant offense, arrogant assertion, blasphemous slander and ridicule, malicious intent, envious sabotage, shameless treachery, cowardly silence, and more subtle failures discernible only to the saintly scholars. Why did it provoke such a response? Because the Hamlet verdict functioned as a double-sided mirror. In those who claimed outward mastery, it exposed an inward dissonance. In those who claimed inward realization, it exposed an outward deficiency. In doing so, it unmistakably revealed the fractures within what is often called the religious class, both online and beyond. It also brought to the surface a deeper, more entrenched issue: the socio-spiritual attitudes directed toward women, even among the scholarly class, even toward women of learning and integrity. The Hamlet verdict exposed just how lowly a price for which so many sell the sacred. وَشَرَوْهُ بِثَمَنٍ بَخْسٍ دَرَاهِمَ مَعْدُودَةٍ وَكَانُوا فِيهِ مِنَ الزَّاهِدِينَ. What followed was not merely an abstract unfolding of ideas, but a sobering reminder of a principle long affirmed in the tradition, that breaches in the unseen order reverberate into the visible world. Within weeks, events of profound human suffering began to escalate, realities that continue to unfold before us. The point here is not to draw simplistic causal lines, but to recall a deeper metaphysical truth: that the condition of hearts, the integrity of divine trust, and the inward and outward alignment of knowledge are not without consequence. The outer calamities of the Ummah mirror its inward state. This is the core underlying principle through which Imam al-Ghazali revived the Islamic sciences and consequently the Ummah. I know there are two questions that arise in the minds of those who don't believe that the Hamlet verdict was true, and even those who do. The first question is, what makes you think that you can expose the faults of others? The answer is once simple, yet completely veiled from those who underestimate God. وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدَرِهِ. The answer is, I don't think that I can expose the faults of others. For the entirety of my life, I saw only my own faults and gazed upon all others with husn al-dhan, good opinion. For the entirety of my life, I have not felt envy toward another and have wished well for every single person I have encountered, regardless of faith. For the entirety of my life, I have not looked down upon another. For the entirety of my life, I have not usurped the right of another, whether spiritual or material. And in any moment in which I doubted my heart, my tears replaced my shortcomings with certainty. There is no door to God but humility. The Sufi maxim states, Jahid tushahid kull al-fawaid. It means strive for God and you will behold the spiritual fruits. It means invest in God and await the return of that investment from Him alone. Now imagine extending that striving in all things and to all people. What would that yield? It yields a transformed vision. Wahdatul mushahada. For a more precise articulation of this concept, refer to lesson 1 of our commentary on Salawat Nur al-Anwar. Yet, in the sight of those who claim religiosity, while embodying its diametrical opposite. This prophetic comportment was taken as lack of intelligence, even mental illness and self-destruction. They chose to see the world that way, and in doing so, they became mirrors of their own condition. These are the fractures through which the Ummah bleeds, not unlike those who stood against the apex of truth and purity, courage and loyalty, the son of the Prophet. حسين مني وأنا من حسين على نبينا وآل بيت النبوة أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم. The second question that might arise, even in the minds of those who believe the Hamlet verdict is true, how could you have possibly orchestrated such a thing while being so completely sure of the outcome? The answer is at once simple, yet infinitely more profound than most people can imagine. A true scholar does not merely read and cite figures. Rather, they enter into their intellectual world so fully that they grasp the principles underlying his method. They form a prophetic intellect. The task then is not to impose our context upon the text, but to enter the text so deeply that its framework may be meaningfully applied to our context. Imagine if we did that with the Book of God, subhanahu wa ta'ala. The answer to the question lies then not in personal assurance, but in prophetic inheritance. I was sure because Imam al-Ghazali was sure. يحبهم ويحبونه. In our next lesson, we will begin to construct a Ghazalian schema, mapping with precision the levels and modalities of progression along the path of sacred knowledge, from layperson to student to scholar to prophetic realization. Imam al-Ghazali revived this ummah through metafiqh. And in every generation, the prophetic inheritors do the same through the Muhammadan reality, sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam, men and women alike. يحمل هذا العلم من كل خلف عدوله ينفون عنه تحريف الغالين وانتحال المبطلين وتأويل الجاهلين. We are the new generation of female scholarship. We are the new breath of tradition. We are the lotus that lives on. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد نور الأنوار وسر الأسرار وترياق الأغيار ومفتاح باب اليسار سيدنا محمد المختار وآله الأطهار وأصحابه الأخيار عدد نعم الله وإفضاله والحمد لله رب العالمين.